Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And in the interest of time, we're going to start as a subcommittee today. We do have members, so we're going to start as a subcommittee. Before I begin, I just have an announcement. The only bill we're hearing today is SB 722, Senator Simitian, RPS bill. Also want to announce, due to Mrs. Fuller's absence, Assemblyman Tran will be filling in for her, appointed by the Speaker to fill in today. So thank you, Mr. Tran, for being here. And Mr. Simitian, Senator Simitian, if you're ready, we're ready for testimony. Folks, real quick. Hey, this is going to be I don't want this process to be long, so I want folks to be ready to come up, make their statements, and not give a dissertation. We're going to make it very short, very quick. We've heard this before, so we don't have to go down the road of rehashing old issues, and we're going to keep this process moving today. So, Senator Simitian, if you're ready, we're going to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dana, is his mic on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Try it again.
And in conclusion, I ask for an aye vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try and just hit the high points because, as members know and as your staff analysis indicates, this measure is a reprise of our efforts last year with Senate Bill 14 and AB 64 on the Assembly side, which were bills passed by this committee and by the legislature, but ultimately vetoed by the governor. What we have done in the interim, Mr. Chairman and members, is highlight the relatively small but important number of issues where there was controversy outstanding at the end of last year, and ask the interested parties to sit down at the table and see if they could find common ground. And just very quickly, I want to say, good all around with respect to all the different stakeholders, including the governor's office, for trying to find ways to sort through some of these issues. The fundamental purpose of the bill, as you know, Mr. Chairman, is pretty straightforward. It enacts into California law a 33% renewable energy procurement requirement by the year 2020, and at the same time tries to provide flexible compliance rules, protect ratepayers from excessive costs, create California-based green jobs wherever possible, and frankly help rescue the state's ailing economy. As I said, the members have heard, I think, most of the guts of the bill from the previous conversations. I'm not going to repeat those, and your staff analysis did a nice job of laying those out one by one. So I want to focus on just a few of the key areas of contention last year and report to you on the progress that I think you will hear about from the witnesses, and I'd rather let them share that with you. On protecting ratepayers from high energy bills due to the cost of renewable energy, the bill now contains language authorizing the CPUC to impose cost caps on each utility. On providing compliance flexibility for utilities and other sellers, the bill now establishes a series of off-ramps that these parties may invoke if there are circumstances outside their control. On the issue of in-state, out-of-state delivery, which was so contentious last year, we now have scrapped last year's definitions and requirements and replaced them with what I characterize as a renewable energy product loading order, which has been carefully negotiated among utilities, independent energy producers, consumer groups, labor, renewable developers, and I think you will find we have much more harmony in the House on that set of issues as well. And then finally, there is language that is carefully crafted to avoid the potential for challenges under the Interstate Commerce Clause. I think that that's important protection to provide. Full disclosure, yes, the bill remains a work in progress, but as you know, Mr. Chair, it will go to another policy committee if we're fortunate enough to see your approval today, and then off to the Appropriations Committee. And I have committed, since I don't happen to think there's any reason for me to have vacation plans in the month of July, I have committed to be here on a weekly basis during the summer to work this through as we go and get down to the finer and smaller points. There are a number of issues that I think we are still going to have to work on. Let me just mention them so you know that we're thinking about them. Clarifying amendments that define various terms like firming and shaping or incremental power or control area. Clearer integration between the provisions that govern private utility RPS obligations and the munis. We need some language for CAISO and CPUC monitoring and reporting. I think probably some further revisions to the compliance flexibility, which are currently being negotiated between environmental groups and some of the investor-owned utilities. But all that being said, I think we are much closer. We had a bill last year that was good enough to have pretty broad-based support and earn your support and the support of the legislature, but it wasn't quite good enough to get a signature, at least in the governor's view, and I think we are much, much closer, and I think you'll hear today that there's, as I say, much more harmony in the House. Final observation, Mr. Chairman, is you and your committee staff have shared with me and my staff a package of recommended amendments. I believe, if I am looking at the correct iteration, it is dated June 24th. Committee amendments: Amendment 1, Amendment 2, Amendment 3, Amendment 4, and Amendment 5. I am prepared to accept those amendments as author's amendments and incorporate them by reference today, sir.
Thank you, Senator. As it relates to witnesses in support, do you have?
I think if I'm not sure if is Jan Smutney Jones here yet? There he is. Thank you. If we could get Matt Friedman and Jan Smutney Jones to come up, I think they will be an interesting pair of witnesses because they are going to be literally and figuratively sitting a lot closer today than they were last year when we had this conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senator Simitian. My name is Matt Friedman, and I am a staff attorney with the Utility Reform Network. TURN represents the interests of residential customers of the utilities in California. We support SB 722 in its revised form. We believe that this proposal is good for consumers, that an aggressive renewables portfolio standard in California will promote stable rates. It will represent an insurance policy against runaway fossil fuel prices in the future. It will displace in-state fossil fuel use, promote economic development, and help California on its path to energy independence. We've worked with a lot of stakeholders over the last several months to try to revise this bill, and we think it's an improved product over what the committee saw last year. This bill includes revisions to the targets and timetables. It includes the renewables portfolio standard loading order that Senator Simitian referenced to ensure that consumers get maximum benefits from the products that the utilities buy to meet their requirements. It provides reasonable flexibility to the utilities to ensure that they're not held to arbitrary one-year targets, but instead are making sustained progress over long periods of time that's producing new steel in the ground, new generation in California and throughout the West. And it also provides equal rules.
Just 1 minute. I would like to establish a quorum, okay? Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford.
Present.
Knight. Berryhill. Buchanan. Carter. Fletcher. Fong. Fuentes. Tran. Furutani. Huffman. Ma. Skinner. Swanson. Valines. Okay.
Thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We think that the adoption of a 33% renewable portfolio standard would truly be a historic achievement for California, and we really hope we can get it done this year. We do have one concern about the bill in print, and we think it's addressed by the committee amendments, which has to do with cost containment. We'd like to see something more robust with some teeth so that we ensure that the cost of this program can be contained and that the decisions about that containment can be left to the Public Utilities Commission, but that they're going to actually have to stick by the assessments that they make in the coming years. So with those amendments, we think this bill is a much improved product, and we really urge your support today.
Thank you, Chair Bradford and members of the committee. I'm Jan Smutney Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Energy Producers Association. We're probably the oldest organization in the state representing independent power. We've been around since 1982, and we represent about 80% of actually the renewable generation that's being delivered to Californians today. We have a real interest in obviously building more renewables to support the California economy going forward. As I think was suggested by Senator Simitian, last year we found ourselves in the rather ironic and unenviable position of having to oppose a bill that would increase market share. for renewables based on some defects, what we perceive the defects of SB 14 last year. Most of those problems are gone. This is a much better bill, much better product than we saw last year. We are prepared to support this going forward. This is not unconditional support. We do have amendments that we believe are very important that we'll push forward. But I think, as Senator Simitian indicated, he has indicated an interest in talking further on those amendments. I just want to flag the big one for everyone so it doesn't come as a surprise. My members believe that the best cost control mechanism is a competitive market. That's going to drive innovation and it's going to drive prices downward. There is a section of this bill that has basically a monopoly utility-owned generation set aside that will eat up a huge amount of the future renewables that we believe is unnecessary and inappropriate in this bill. We are not arguing that the utilities should not be allowed to build their own power plants, but that should be done within a competitive constraint, or context rather, and that's important because the ratepayers actually are the ones backing those deals, and there's a history of those deals being more expensive. For example, in the photovoltaic arena, PG&E's program is about 19% more expensive than a comparable program for the independent power producers. So again, the utilities have the ability right now to go to the Commission and ask to be allowed to be built things. They in fact have done that. The Commission has approved it, and in many cases encourages it. So that's the one remaining really big issue for us. There are some cleanup issues that I think that the Senator spoke to with respect to how we ensure that all the products that are out there are properly identified to basically be able to access our market, and we can get along with that going forward. So ultimately, we think that this is a bill should be moved forward today. We are prepared to conditionally support that. If we can't come to terms on other issues, you may hear something different from us. But today, I think it would be very useful to kind of move this thing forward and give us something to talk about the remainder of the summer. Thank you.
Thank you. As for our next witnesses, let's limit our comments now and support to 2 minutes or less if you can. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Scott Wetsch on behalf of the California State Association of Electrical Workers, the California State Pipe Trades Council, the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers, and IBEW Local 18 at the LA Department of Water and Power. Last year, Mr. Smutny Jones amused the committee when he said that SB 14 was a good work product until it started to hang out with the wrong crowd. My clients could perhaps say the same thing about 722 this year. But we're not. We're here to conditionally support SB 722. It doesn't provide as high an assurance as we would like to ensure that Californians benefit from the RPS to the degree we believe they should. But we understand that in this process there needs to be compromise on issues as large as this. I said that our support is conditional, and I just want to make sure the members of the committee are crystal clear. It's conditional on the provision that remain in the bill that empowers the utilities to be able to build and own generation. That's the conditional support of labor on this bill. If we're going to hold the utilities to meet a very high standard and we're going to impose significant penalties on them, it's inherent upon the legislature to empower them to use all of the different avenues available to them to meet that 33% RPS. And so we feel very strongly about that. We'll continue to work with the author and folks, other stakeholders on that issue, but we feel extremely strongly about that. So we'd urge and I vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wetsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark Joseph, on behalf of the Coalition of California Utility Employees, I would second what Mr. Wetsch said and just expand with a little bit of history. Last year, when we started on this process, we originally saw it, and the bill originally had in it a requirement for utilities to build generation. The current bill is only an option for utilities to build generation. That seems to be a fair compromise. We have compromised on that. But as Mr. Wetsch said, we're not prepared to go further than that. With that, we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one is.
Mr. Chair and members, Scott Governor on behalf of California Wind Energy Association. We are very encouraged by the progress on this bill. There are a few outstanding issues, which everyone has said as well. But again, we are very encouraged, and we do have a conditional support on this and look forward to resolving those going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council. Also very happy to see the parties getting together and finding a compromise for this bill. Also share the same concerns that Mr. Wetch and Mr. Joseph expressed, but also urge a aye vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Erin Niemela representing the Large Scale Solar Association. We are in strong support of the bill and just want to thank the chair and the author and their respective staffs for working so hard to put this together. A little note on cost containment. Obviously, we have philosophical concerns about cost containment. We believe that for this marketplace to be as successful as the current gas marketplace, it can't have one hand tied behind its back. That said, we understand the philosophical underpinnings. We would only say that 65% of the market is not capped. That said, there's been a lot of work that's gone into this. We really appreciate it, and we certainly support the 33% and support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Donna Brownsley representing the Solar Alliance. We're here in support of the bill. We are okay with the cost containment language. We may want to, work with your staff and with the author on some tweaks on that. I've asked the sergeants to pass around a handout which shows the decrease in costs in terms of PV solar, as well as the comparison of photovoltaic to gas peaker plants in terms of costs, because I thought it was important to sort of inform the policy discussions around the RPS. We strongly support the 33%. I'm happy to answer any questions on this data, and want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your staff and the author for all the progress made on this important issue. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, hi, I'm Kent Palmerton, General Manager of the Power and Water Resources Pooling Authority. We are a publicly owned electric utility of irrigation and water districts in Northern California, approximately 100 megawatts in size. In 2006, my load that was responsible for RPS compliance was about 8% of my load due to hydro conditions. And in 2009, about 92% of my load would be subject to RPS. We are looking for an average, a 10-year average. The minimum average that we can withstand, I believe, is a 7-year average of water conditions to allow us to be able to meet the RPS compliance targets in a cost-effective manner. We're in conditional support of the bill, and there is a section, or in SB 14, there was a section that described our utility where we were provided a 3-year average. That was insufficient last year. We would like to see that bumped to 7 to 10 years of average, and we would support the bill with that amendment.
Thank you. Next one is.
My name is Peter Miller. I'm representing the Natural Resources Defense Council, and we're here in strong support of the bill. We see SB 722 as a cornerstone in the state's efforts to build a clean energy economy of the 21st century. We want to thank the chair and the author for their hard work, and we look forward to continuing to work with stakeholders to improve and refine the bill and get something out that's going to be workable, provide adequate flexibility and cost containment for utilities, for developers, and ensure that we can move forward in a way that's effective and really allows us to accomplish the ambitious goals of this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Laura Wislin. I work with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I first want to say thank you so much to you and your staff members for leadership on this very important issue. We are in support of the bill. 2 quick things. We want to make sure that the compliance language on the RPS contains clarity and specificity. And in terms of cost containment, we support containing the cost of renewables, but we do want to make sure that the costs, that any cost containment policy reflects the social, environmental, and economic benefits of renewables that may not be quantified in the cost. And we also want to make sure that the RPS program cost containment policy does not shut down the RPS program, that there maintains some sort of consistency over time. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Caitlin Vega for the California Labor Federation, also here in support. It's very important to us that as we move toward this new economy that we take advantage of the skilled workforce we have in California and maximize opportunities to keep jobs here. We think that this is an important work product that gets us toward that goal, and following the lead of our utility unions, we are here in support.
Sylvia Solis Shaw on behalf of the California Biomass Energy Alliance. We'd like to thank the author and staff. The bill has come a long way. Our biggest issue was the cost containment issue, and we feel that we are happy with the language thus far. We still have a concern, and therefore we're support with amendments dealing with Section 16 of the bill as outlined by Mr. Smutny-Jones previously. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Jack Walco with the Walco Group on behalf of the Imperial Irrigation District and the Modesto Irrigation District. First, with regard to IID's perspective, see this bill as a significant step forward from last year, and like the balance it strikes between out-of-state and in-state development. There's, as the members know, the Imperial Valley has a great source of yet-to-be-developed renewable energy, and we think this bill will help encourage that. So for both entities, we like the general direction of this bill and encourage its movement forward and look forward to working with the author and his staff on clarifying amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Mr. Chair, members, Cindy Howell with SDG&E, and we're here supportive of SB 722 with some amendments, but believe that this is a better bill than last year, and we actually like that one. SDG&E, for those of you who aren't aware, we have made a voluntary commitment to procure towards 33% renewable energy and are well on our way to doing so. Our concerns with this, and we will continue working with the author, are related to some of the open issues. It's very important to SDG&E that there are equal rules that apply to all load-serving entities, and that's one open issue in the bill. We have some concern with the near-term compliance, and hope that the new program will embrace long-term contracts and focus on the steel in the ground, as opposed to encouraging the utilities to continue signing short-term contracts just for the mere sake of compliance. So we're continuing to work on that issue as well. And then we want to make sure that whatever contracts, even if they need to be amended and go back before the commission, that have been signed prior to the effective date of this new program going to 33% are grandfathered. And again, we've made a lot of progress on that language. We appreciate all the work of stakeholders, staff, and the author in addressing these issues, and we'll continue working with them. I'd like to raise one additional question just with regard to, I think, the last amendment on workforce recruitment and training. We are required, utilities are required to a great extent to competitively bid all of our contracts, and we are in a role, the utility, assigning PPAs, and so we're not doing the actual construction, development, and contracting related to that construction on the renewable development. So we'll continue working with the author and staff, with the chair, the author and staff on that issue, and understanding what beyond the Commission's current GO 156 we're looking to accomplish in this bill related to renewable contracting and recruitment. Again, SDG&E would really like to see a 33% bill get to the governor and get signed this year, so we're supportive.
got it.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Mr. Chairman and members, Ed Manning with KP Public Affairs on behalf of First Solar. We support the bill. We thank the chair for his efforts and Mr. Simitian to advance the bill today. We, First Solar, came to California because of the 20% RPS. We will stay in California and expand and invest more because of the 33% when it happens. We're the largest solar company production-wise and with projects in California, so this bill is critical, and we appreciate your support.
Juanita Martinez with Smith Watson Company on behalf of Iberdrola. We are here in support of the bill, but we do have some continuing concerns and look forward to working with the chair and the author and staff on addressing some of these concerns.
Audra Hartman with Next Era Energy. We also commend the author and the staff and all of the parties for getting this far in the process. We have some remaining concerns about the length of firmed and shaped contracts, about the percentages, and the IOU self-build, and like to work with the chair, the author, and the staff to try to fix those concerns going forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Don Gilbert representing TerraGen Power, the largest private renewable developer in the state and the country, actually. We support the bill moving out of committee today. We do have some concerns, primarily the one articulated by Jan Smutny-Jones regarding utility-owned generation and then a few other minor issues that we're still taking a look at, but we're pleased with the product right now and hope it passes out today. Thanks.
Next witness.
Edward Randolph with the California Public Utilities Commission. We do not have a formal position on the bill yet because we haven't had time to have a commission vote based on the amendments this week. However, we have been on record for many years supporting a 33% RPS standard and believe it's very important, given the infrastructure build-out that will be needed to meet a 33% RPS, that we do establish definitive policies as soon as possible. I will note a few staff concerns that have been noted as we've gone through the bill that we've shared with the committee staff and the author. All of these issues deal with the administrative burden this bill may put on the commission. And the big issue we want to work out going through with this bill is to make sure that our administrative efforts are focused on getting actual results out in the field and less on proceedings that may be about making excuses on why we aren't getting results in the field.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Cassandra Goff with Calpine, the state's largest renewable energy producer. We're here generally supportive of the bill. We have 3 issues that we'd like the author and the committee to consider. The first is it's unclear to us whether in-state unbundled renewable energy credits count in the first bucket in the 75%. We'd like clarification on that. We think that's important as it creates in-state jobs, localized environmental benefits, and also it's probably the only compliance mechanism in the RPS that supports participation in the RPS by the net meter distributed rooftop solar. I hope that's a technical amendment that we can make, but we just wanted to go on the record that we want that in the bill explicitly. Second, with regards to the conditions in the firming and shaping, the conditions of having a 10-year contract or ownership, we find that those are difficult to meet, and since that bucket is already limited to 25% or less, we don't think that those restrictions are necessary and limit our ability for one of our very clean combined power cycle facilities in Oregon, right across the border, to bring in that green power. The third thing we don't have a solution for, but we want to affiliate ourselves with some of the energy service providers who we are an energy service provider. Safeway is our largest client. We don't see a clear pathway for compliance. We want to comply for the 33%, but we'd like to work with the supporters and others of the bill to identify a pathway by which we can be compliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Bradford, members of the committee, Senator Simidian. My name is Andrew Ulmer. I'm an attorney with the California Independent System Operator. As you all are aware, the ISO is a nonprofit public benefit corporation that operates the majority of California's electricity grid for the benefit of its citizens. And we fully intend to continue to operate the grid in a reliable manner consistent with the state's environmental policies, including the Renewable Portfolio Standard. SB 722 identifies 3 categories of transactions that would qualify as eligible RPS transactions on a going forward basis. I want to talk to you about one of those categories and one issue that we have a concern with. The first category of transactions identifies those transactions for which output from a renewable resource must be delivered simultaneous with its generation. This category of transaction has the potential, as it does today under existing law, to create overgeneration conditions on the electricity grid. When this occurs, market prices may not be sufficient to cover the fuel costs of conventional generators. It's also possible that California's ratepayers may find themselves paying for renewable power under a contract and possibly also paying to sell power back that is imported into the state. And if overgeneration conditions persist, the ISO will ultimately curtail output from renewable power, and this could result in additional risk premiums in renewable contracts. To mitigate this issue, we've recommended to the author to consider apportioning fewer transactions into this first category. We believe each category of eligible transactions in SB 722's proposed RPS loading order will ultimately lead to the development of new generation, renewable generation in California or near California. Also, we think that potentially periodic reports to the legislature are a good means to assess whether SB 722 has adverse market outcomes has adverse outcomes in the wholesale electricity market. We've identified a few additional concerns with the proposed bill, and we intend to work with the author to address each of these. And that concludes my comments, and I thank you for your consideration.
Chairman, members, John White with the Clean Power Campaign. We're supportive of the bill. We're still digesting the amendments. We look forward to seeing further discussions and amendments, and are grateful for the Senator's continuing efforts and efforts of all the party. The details do matter. On the other hand, we are looking for greater clarity and simplicity, so I don't want to burden the committee with more details than you might need for the moment. But we do want to keep working on it. We think it's a very important bill, and we're grateful for everybody's time and energy on this issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Will Gonzalez on behalf of the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD. We are generally supportive of the bill. I think it's going in the right direction. One of the issues I'll just highlight very briefly that we're concerned about is just a 75% number in what I guess we'll call bucket number one. Northern California utilities don't quite have the interconnections across state borders that Southern California utilities have, but I think we've raised that concern, and we look forward to working with the author to address those issues. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Jim Metropolis with the Sierra Club. We certainly support the bill moving forward. It's a really good bill. We certainly are looking for a bill that also includes a strong mandate for at least 33% by 2020, that has strong enforcement provisions and a firm timetable for the utilities to meet these goals. And we'd certainly like to see that the definition of renewables remains as it is, and as we move forward, it doesn't become weakened or expanded. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Randy Chin with Southern California Edison. We find ourselves in the in-between group. We're neither supportive nor in opposition, but we want to urge you to continue the process and have the bill move forward. I think the author has noted the negotiations that have been occurring. We've been a part of those negotiations, been talking with all the parties, and we think that this bill is a big improvement from SB 14 from last year. While the improvements are substantial, though, there's much more work that needs to be done. Of course, if the bill didn't change from its current form, we'd have to oppose that, but we think further discussions will be very productive. I just want to underscore the three sort of major issues for us that we want to continue to work on. One is this notion of equal rules. We want to make sure that every load-serving entity plays by the same rules. We think that's just an issue of fairness. We didn't support Proposition 16 because we feel with equal rules, we'll do just fine. But unequal rules will tilt that playing field. So if, for example, a competitor were given a different time frame to meet 33%, or if they were allowed to count different resources as renewable than what we can count, that would be a big problem for us. So equal rules is one of the things we want to underscore. There was a mention of the compliance language by the representative for the Union of Concerned Scientists, and we're negotiating with them on that, so we think we can probably get there. The last is the mechanism for dealing with the in-state and out-of-state resources. I think the ISO representative talked about that. We think the mechanism probably works. We're trying to digest what the numbers mean and how to implement that, so this is just a continuing area of discussion. We don't think we have a fundamental difference with the author on any of this, and so because of that, we'd encourage you to keep the bill moving along so we can continue these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Delaney Hunter on behalf of Pacific Corp. We're a small multi-jurisdictional utility serving about 47,000 customers here in the state. We are also not in full support, but we're not opposing. We're sort of in the squishy middle, trying to digest a 56-page bill. Couple of minor issues. There are some things that need to sort of be cleaned up. We had some questions about sort of conflicting dates in both the modifications to the Public Resources Code 25741 and how those correspond with the dates in 39916. They modify the online date for compliance and sort of things that would count. We would recommend that you maintain existing statute, which is a January 105 date, or at very least synchronize the two dates. There appears in the current language to be sort of this weird 7-month no man's land. We're not sure what happens if you had things come online in that period. Additionally, we enjoy flexibility in meeting the 20% currently under current statute PU Code 39917. We're extremely pleased to see that maintained. We would like to have that firmed up a little bit, especially in light of the new sort of loading order. We are served primarily by our other resources in 6 western states. We don't have resources really in California, but for the Klamath dams, which we are working towards removing. So we're looking for additional flexibility in that bucket. Also, there needs to be some cleanup. There's a cross-reference to the market price referent, which is going away under the statute. Lastly, we currently do not enjoy any cost containment protection, as do our other investor-owned utility brethren. We are pleased that the language in the statute, as proposed by 722, does push the PUC to adopt cost limitation for all electrical corporations. We'd like to ensure that that does apply for our customers. As we push towards 33, it's going to be exceedingly hard for us. We are balancing resources and RPS programs in 4 other states. We will end up having to buy resources just to serve California load. That's exceedingly expensive when you can only spread cost to 47,000 people, most of which are low income. So we really are going to need to have a cost containment coverage. We look forward to working with Mr. Smidian and his staff as well as you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Shaughnessy. I'm a director of renewable energy at Evolution Markets. Evolution is the largest environmental broker in the world and an active participant in RPS markets throughout the country. With our extensive involvement in the various RPS markets, we feel that it's essential to utilize the 3 buckets that have been created in Senate Bill 722 to take full advantage of the abundant natural resources we have out here in the West. For that, we are making 2 recommendations to amend Senate Bill 722. The first would be to change the percentages for the allocated buckets. We would recommend 60% as a minimum for the in-state facilities and contracts, 20% for firmed and shaped, and 20% for a rec-only contract. And then number 2, we would also agree that maintaining the commercial online date of 2005. We think that these are 2 points that are going to be essential to help have the utilities, give them the flexibility and the efficiency to reach these new 33% targets that are being discussed. And we'll also support development here in California and as well as the WEC as a whole. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Greg Cook, representing the Northern California Power Agency and MSR Public Power Agency. Both of those organizations are in support of the intent and the policies articulated in this legislation. For the past year and a half, we've been working very well with Senator Smidian and his staff. We're very pleased with the direction that we have been able to accomplish thus far. We look forward to continuing that dialogue and to addressing any of the remaining concerns we may have. We urge that this bill go forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Theo Peos, representing the Alliance for Energy Retail Markets. Well, happy to say that except for a few municipal utilities, we're the only large load-serving entities that are in compliance with the 2010 RPS deadline by the end of 2010. So obviously, we don't have quite as much of an uphill battle as the utilities do in terms of load they serve, but we definitely had to bend over backwards to be able to comply with it. And our position has always been that we absolutely have to comply. We have grave concerns because the in-state requirement as drafted now does present us with a lot of huge challenges getting that much in-state resources when, for the most part, the entities that are going to be buying up all the in-state renewables are the large utilities. There just won't be enough of a market out there for us to buy in order to get to that large mandate. We are talking to author staff. We hope to work some of that out. We have some creative solution, one that will actually provide quite a bit of job training funds for those that aren't able to benefit from the jobs that are provided here. And we certainly hope to work with people in the future, but at this point in time, we do have grave concerns. Thank you.
Great. Next witness.
Mr. Chair, Valerie Torella with PG&E, also testifying to concerns. Our desire is to support a comprehensive package as we supported SB 14 last year, and keeping in mind 2 major issues, which is first, protecting our customers from potentially high costs of renewables, and setting up a realistic rules and eligibility structure to achieve the aggressive targets. And on cost containment, we do agree, I guess, with the committee that we need to see some teeth in the language in the bill, and we look forward to reviewing the committee's suggestions. But we are also committed to expanding the market of renewables, and that market expansion and gradual implementation of the program can help mitigate those costs and is part of a cost containment structure in PG&E's opinion. And so to that end, we're concerned about the 75% set aside, and that it's too restrictive. And we do seek to expand eligibility to resources in British Columbia that we believe are environmentally protective and very cost competitive for our customers. Renewables are very lumpy, as people have heard that term before. They don't always meet timelines and come online when we expect. SB 14 recognized that, created a stair-step approach type of structure to meet the targets, and we're concerned that SB 722 is going away from that structure. SB 22, though, is we've had very fruitful discussions about issues that are outside of the control of the utility in the flexible compliance provisions, and we'll continue, obviously, to work with the author on that. And lastly, of course, equal rules. And over the many years, we've made significant progress with the author in emphasizing the equal rules for all load-serving entities in a comprehensive statewide bill such as this. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition. Seeing none, members with questions. Mr. Swanson.
Move bill.
Bill has been moved and second. Mr. Fuentes, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Simitian, for bringing this measure forward again. I find myself in the same position as some of the testimony that I think it's a very good measure and it's getting better, but I am squishy in my support at this point as well. And I also find that I'm sort of uniquely situated to be able to hear this bill in appropriation. So I would like to figure out how to deal with as much of the policy as we can before it gets to a fiscal committee, but I'm finding that because of the deadlines and this sort of thing, they may not be completely adequate. So I would like to talk some more with you on a lot of the policy, but my chief concern happens to deal with the publicly owned utilities, as you can well imagine. And in the analysis which I've received this morning, specifically, I think it's point number 21, that sets up a structure for the publicly owned utilities to interact with the Energy Commission, and as a result of the interaction, potentially have penalties levied on them as a result of ARB's findings in terms of enforcement of the RPS and this sort of thing. I guess my very basic question is, how are those penalties collected, and to what end are they used?
Let me ask my staff to give some thought to that while I respond to the sort of the contextual part of the question, if I may, Assembly Member, and just a point of reference through the chair, if I may. We are headed, as I understand it, to another policy committee, so there will be not only the opportunity but the necessity to take up some of these policy issues again. Assemblymember Fuentes, I think you heard the interesting challenge that we face, and it's typical of the debate we've had on this bill with respect to different points of view. You're now raising concerns about potential adverse impacts on municipally owned utilities. On the other hand, you heard from 3 investor-owned utilities, all of whom said you need to push those munis farther towards full compliance, equal compliance, level playing field. There is, in my judgment, on most of these issues, a balance to be found between legitimate competing interests. So on the one hand, the bill attempts to ensure that the same targets are real for munis as they are for IOUs. On the other hand, we have tried to respect the IOU's assertion, keeping in mind I come from a municipally owned utility in Palo Alto where I was a council member and mayor. We've tried to respect their assertion that they are, after all, independent levels of government, not appropriately regulated by the PUC, tried to leave them a fair amount of autonomy in terms of establishing their own processes and procedures, and I think you'll find that in the bill, and work with the CEC rather than the PUC. Now, I'm not sure if I have an answer for you right now on what actually happens to the penalties if and when they are assessed, but let me see if I can check with staff.
As staff is researching that, I think the same can be true for the IOUs. If a penalty is levied on an IOU or a POU, the question is the same. I think there's equal treatment there, and I realize that most of the utilities are endeavoring to not be in the penalty phase. But and I didn't see it in the language largely because, again, the constraints of time here and having received this information very late, if the penalties were to be attributed to, say, service areas that are affected, either IOU or POU, meaning that if you're out of compliance and a fee or a penalty is levied, and that penalty could be used by that load-serving entity to upgrade infrastructure or buy more renewables, that sort of thing seems like a very fair approach to me. But I think the bill is silent on that point, which is why I ask. If I missed it, then I'd like to be informed.
No, staff is reminding me of a couple things, but I don't want to lose your point, so if I could just stay with it through the chair for a minute. Some of my friends, in other words, if I could restate, at some risk, if I could restate your point and make sure I get it so that we can think about this going forward, I think what I hear you saying is if folks are going to get penalized, rather than have that money go off to a black hole somewhere,
the state of California,
should those funds rather be turned around and used to reinforce and support the very goals where someone may have come up short. Did I get that?
That's correct.
Good.
And mindful, of course, that ARB, also under their charge of under AB 32, potentially has the ability to levy additional penalties. So the concern, whether I think you're an IOU or POU, would be to make certain that you're not sort of double dinged here. So if you're not satisfying your AB 32 requirements as a result of the generation that you have in your territory, if there were a way to make sure that that penalty stream of money is used for upgrades, renewable procurement goals, that sort of thing, that would make me feel much more comfortable when it deals with the and I think that, by the way, is a very level approach for everybody involved.
Good. Your comment about the ARB work prompts me to make an observation which I should have made earlier, is there is no, we call it the double ding provision. There is a provision in the bill that specifically precludes someone from being double dinged. So you don't get hit by the ARB and then told that for the same shortcoming, you are penalized again. And then on the issue of where the
single ding,
the single ding, thank you, the single ding just goes back into the CEC's clean energy funds to be used for what you and I might think are beneficial purposes, but not with the same focus and specificity that you described. So I'd be happy to work with you in your office as well as the chair to pursue the concept and see if we could make some progress there.
Right, that'd be very helpful. And so moving right along, like I said, there's a lot that needs to be, I think, discussed, and hopefully Natural Resources will benefit from some more time reviewing the analyses and the language. But on cost containment, I notice in the analysis that there's some suggested recommendations or amendments to the bill. How do these cost containments as proposed by the analysis juxtaposed with yours? Because cost containment, I think, hinges on two very important things. One, the procurement levels, and I understand that's a negotiation, and folks have mentioned, the 75% being too much, and I think that will be sorted out. Those are, I think, easier things to deal with. But the ability to make certain that we have a proper accounting for the cost, I think, is critical. And I think the second part here that pivots the whole conversation is transmission, and recognizing that there are probably 6 key lines for the success of this or proposed lines that really are the linchpin for the success of this new potential goal here. How do we account for that cost containment? How do we at this point, and I realize it's probably a negotiation, how do you propose to deal with the additional costs? I noticed that the original language says here that there's going to be a higher cost, but how do we add some additional transparency so folks know what it is that they're getting? I, by the way, am not opposed to paying more. I'm just for wanting to know what it is that I'm paying for.
Couple of quick points. For those of you who don't recall the painful conversations that we went through last year, we started out talking about just and reasonable, then having moved away from the MPR, the market price referent. Then during the course of the year, there wasn't support for just and reasonable, so we went back to what I would describe as a form of market price referent. That left some people pretty unhappy. We then entered into the bill this year, and it was the result of the negotiations between and among the parties that we tried to corral a cost containment measure that is the one you see in the bill that talks about the authorization and indicates that the PUC may exercise its cost containment authority pursuant to the language we had in the bill. The chairman and the committee staff wanted what I think somebody described as a more robust or muscular cost containment provision, and the critical differential is the simple but important word there, Mr. Chairman. As I understood your intention, it doesn't say anything about may, it says shall, that they shall do this. And I thought importantly, understanding that what makes everybody nervous is the one area where, whatever your point of view is, people are a little nervous that the world may change in a few years. So the cost containment mechanism calls for essentially a check back in the year 2016 before, I think, January 1st of 2017, if I remember the statute correctly. And then finally, as to your point, and I think I understand the point, the obvious question is, are we really monitoring this carefully, and do we know what the real costs are as we go? There was reporting language in the bill that I think specifically references that and should provide you with some assurance. I'm looking at staff who's nodding their head there, perhaps remembering the language better than I am. But there is reporting language there, both that has been there historically, going back to SB 107, the predecessor, which was the 20% by 2010, and there is now some additional language in terms of reporting obligations at the PUC about these very cost containment issues.
So, and I think that's an elegant way to deal with the challenge, given sort of the load-serving entities' individual characteristics and their regions. I mean, I think the analysis astutely points out, some load-serving entities will benefit from just the sheer geography, and others will benefit from transmission, corridor access, and that sort of thing. But I'm not understanding completely. So the PUC would sort of understand each of the entities' unique characteristics and thereby propose procurement expenditure limits of some sort. Is that sort of the thinking of how the report would synthesize with the actual procurement?
I'm going to look to your staff has been to some extent involved. I believe that's a fairly accurate description, looking to committee staff and to my own staff. But we can follow up with you on that, and if there are refinements there that you think are helpful or important, I'm happy to consider.
Well, I want to commend you on it, because I think it's an elegant approach, because one size doesn't fit all. But the challenge then, the rub here is, so you have the PUC sort of assessing the capabilities and capacity for procurement, which I think is very reasonable, and then it establishes procurement expenditure levels, which I think is also very, very smart. And that speaks very well to the investor-owned utilities. But what happens to a publicly owned utility at that point? Because when we talk about, and I hear this from the investor-owned utilities, that we want a level playing field, but in some ways here, I don't know that the characteristics for municipal utilities are totally accounted for in that model. One, the PUC would not be looking at, it doesn't seem from the analysis here, and again, I apologize for not reviewing the language, it was late production, but the analysis doesn't seem to indicate how the PUC would then sort of take a look, and it doesn't, I think, look at the municipal utilities load-serving sort of geography and this sort of thing, and thereby is unable to actually promote or push a expenditure limit, because the POUs do not respond to the PUC in this model. So in some ways, the requirement, the necessity to have to procure at the statewide mandate level is on the municipal utilities, yet the sort of analysis and sincere look at their capability and capacity is ignored. So I would want to work more on that, but point out that in some ways the municipal utilities could be, and I don't know for sure, but they could be starting at a deficit, given that there isn't any sort of limitation on their expenditures on what they have to do in order to meet the requirements. So that part is a glaring omission for me, but would be happy to observe in natural resources how that's dealt with and ultimately deal with it in appropriations if need be.
I take that very subtle hint, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. And as I said, there's a lot here, but I do want to congratulate you on your efforts. This bill is a significant improvement from last year. But again, I join my municipal utility comrades here in saying that I'm squishy at my support, but I'm happy to help move this bill along.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, take just another
Go right
moment,
ahead,
because
Senator.
I want to make sure that I take away the understanding of the concern so that we can try and respond to it successfully. I take your point to be, sir, that not only are municipal utilities or publicly owned utilities different than investor-owned utilities, but that within the group of municipal utilities or publicly owned utilities, that there are different sets of circumstances among those various entities, and we need to make sure that if we're going to talk about cost containment, that we reflect in the cost containment mechanism an understanding of the differences between and among the different POUs or munis.
And I think that's, in addition to the understanding the differences is one thing. I think figuring out and I don't have an answer only because I don't have the benefit of thinking about this as long as I wish I had, but accounting for the flexibility necessary to make it so that the mandate is honest and strong, but make certain that the municipal utilities have the ability to sort of approve their expenditure limits at a way that is still in compliance with the overall mandate. Otherwise, the potential for rate shock, just given sort of the disparity in terms of what investor-owned utility unit of electricity costs versus what it costs in a POU territory. If we say that you have to get to 33% or whatever the yearly 2015 goal is, whatever that is, the expectation is that they just ramp up to whatever level we say, whereas the IOUs would have the potential to say, well, given the circumstances of the world and procurement, your expenditure limit is this, and there isn't that flexibility built into the munis.
I got it.
So there's a lot here that we've got to talk about. But again, I'm very supportive of seeing this bill continue moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, in allowing us the time so I could make sure I understood the issues.
I appreciate the dialogue between the two. Any more questions amongst committee members? Ms. Skinner.
I also wanted to give my thanks to the author, to the stakeholders, and to our chair and staff for their work on the bill, to the stakeholders and for having met over some period of time and made a lot of progress over the product that we had last year, and to our chair and staff for their input on enumerating some of their concerns regarding the cost containment so that we can get it right and achieve a 33% goal without an undue burden on ratepayers, which I think is very, very important, and without sending a signal to entities that they can game the market, because certainly we don't want to have the result of a goal like this be something where we have entities game us as we experienced in the past. That said, the difficulty, of course, with any cost containment is we have no cost containment on our fossil fuel resources. We also have an economic structure that doesn't put a price on the externalities. So while we may be protecting the direct ratepayer cost, we may be experiencing other costs due to the byproduct, say, of a natural gas peaker plant or other fossil fuel generation. And it's whether it be air quality issues, public health issues, or what have you, or for that matter, if we in fact through this bill achieve the kind of job creation that I think most of us are intent upon, there is a benefit overall to the economy and to the ratepayer for that, which is hard to then factor in terms of what the ratepayer's direct cost is. I say that mostly to put in a conceptual sort of tone to how we look at these kind of dynamics, but also clearly I'm expressing support for a cost containment because our ratepayers do experience that issue directly. I would like it, I would prefer that we had the ability to price properly with the externalities, but that's not the place that we're in right now. I am hopeful that, not only hopeful, I'm confident that the communications will continue between the stakeholders. I also wanted to express that I really appreciate in hearings like this when parties come to the table and give us specifics that they're concerned about, so that we know what happened last year. Very commonly, as we would have these policy committee hearings, and parties would come and say, well, it's a work in progress, and not give us any specifics. And then at the very end, all of a sudden, it was like they all came to the table and said, no, we don't like the bill, and had big problems. So it's much better for us to hear very directly what parties' specific concerns are, so as we go into the next policy committee and as we go forward, we can try to address those. We won't necessarily be able to address every concern that every party will bring to the table, but the more we know the specifics, the easier it is for our staff, our chair, the Natural Resources Committee, other committees, and other parties working on this bill to actually try to address them. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Skinner. Assemblyman Swanson.
Since the chairs of both of the committees that will see this bill next had the longest set of questions, I think the bill will be thoroughly vetted. So I don't have questions.
Okay. Any other members with questions? Seeing none, let me just first make my statements as it relates to this issue and thank the author, Senator Simitian, for all his hard work, and staff on both sides for the work that has been put forth to bring this issue to this vote today. As I've met with the various stakeholders as we dealt with this issue, I've learned that it's a lot of moving parts. You have the environmental community that has their concerns, you have the industry that has their concerns, the utilities that have their concern, and ratepayers who definitely have their concerns, as well as this legislative body that have our concern to make sure that we bring forth a product that is representative of where we want to be as a state, as a nation, as it relates to renewable energy. But at the end of the day, I think regardless of all those different moving parts and interests, there were 4 prongs, I think, that we all agreed upon: deliverability, sustainability, reliability, and affordability. And I think if we continue to work in that vein to make sure that those 4 key areas are addressed, we're going to have a product that we can be proud of here in California and through this legislative process. I, like my colleague, Assemblyman Fuentes, also had concerns as it relates to the IOUs and the public-owned utilities as it relates to cost, but we can work that out. But I differ with my colleague, Mr. Fuentes. I do not want to pay more. So, nor many of the residents that we represent here in California do not want to pay more. So that's why affordability is key. But we do understand we do have to pay for what we get, regardless of what it is that we're buying. So with that in mind, I just, again, want to thank all the hard work that has been put forth. I thank the Senator for taking the amendment that deals with workforce development, which is key because, again, with all the dialogue that has come across on this issue, the one that was attached to it also was job opportunities, job development. So it's key that we show those jobs, we demonstrate those jobs, but most importantly, those jobs represent and reflect the people here in the state of California, and that's key with this issue moving forward. But understanding that, we have a motion by Mr. Swanson, seconded by Mr. Fong. It's a do pass with and with the understanding that Senator Simitian will take those amendments in natural resources. So, Madam Secretary, please call the vote.
Bradford.
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Knight. Berryhill. Buchanan. Buchanan, aye. Carter. Carter, aye. Fletcher. Fong.
Aye.
Fong, aye. Fuentes.
Aye.
Fuentes, aye. Tran. No. Tran, no. Furutani. Huffman. Ma. Ma, aye. Skinner. Aye. Skinner, aye. Swanson.
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valines. No. Valines, no.
The bill is out 8-2, and we'll leave the bill on call. The roll open for absent members to add on. Thank you.
For
We'll leave it open for 15 minutes for those absent members to. Huffman, aye.